Thanks. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Glendale City Council Workshop Session of February 9th, 2021. The meeting is called to order. I will now conduct an attendance roll call. Please signify by saying present. Council member. It's going to be a long day. Council member Aldama.
Present, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Council member Clark.
Here.
Council member Malnar.
Present.
Council member Tomachoff.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Present.
Again. I'm Ian Hugh, I'm present, and Mayor Wires is excused. Ms. Bauer, will you please introduce item 1?
Discussion and direction regarding the Glendale Operations Complex Master Plan.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide the workshop study item today is our Director of Field Operations, Michelle Watenko.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor and Council. As Ms. Bauer said, we are seeking council consensus on 2 items, and I will cover that at the end of the presentation. So today's presentation is an update on the Glendale Operations Campus Master Plan. And just for clarification, this is a master plan type process, so this is not a design. You're not approving construction. We're going to be asking for consensus on that high-level master plan. So it's the first step in the program. So today's presentation will go through the history of the campus. We'll talk about the current use, who is on the campus, and what it is used for. We'll talk future needs of the campus, and then we'll present to you a proposed phased master plan. And this is really what staff's recommending we move forward with, and we'll discuss then next steps. So I'm going to spend a little more time on history than we have in the past. Some of the buildings on the site date back to the 1950s. So there is construction of the Spring City, and it's currently used as a warehouse. Was initially constructed as a knitting factory back in the 1950s. Since then, in 1976, we did construct many of the operations campus buildings, and I'll point those out to you when we get to the map section. In 2002, there was a 25-year field operations complex master plan that was approved by council. And I do want to point out it's the same complex. It was previously called the Field Operations Complex, but to provide a little bit of clarity and not get it confused with the Field Operations Department, we've changed its name to the Glendale Operations Campus, just to provide a lot of clarity about who is on the campus. That 2002 master plan approval by council was important because it did give direction then on the future of some of those buildings, and I'll refer back to that a little bit later in the presentation. Based upon that approved master plan, projects were put into the capital plan, and in 2004 they completed what they called at the time Phase 1 construction, and that included 3 new buildings, fleet, warehouse, and transit, and I'll point those out a little bit later on the maps. And in 2005, the city purchased the Lazy J Trailer Lodge for the specific purpose of expansion of this complex. In 2016, as significant time had gone since the prior master plan, needs had changed, staff presented to council, and council approved a contract with DWL Architects and Planners for a professional services agreement to give us to provide an update on the master plan. Staff subsequently came back forward on September 11th with a draft master plan. At that time, council requested further study happen, including looking at could we repurpose some of the existing buildings, could we look at remodeling or expanding, and then look at needs of all city departments. So as a result of that workshop, council did approve another $10,000 amendment for DWL to finalize it, and that gets us really to where we are today. What was presented to council in the past with that proposed prior master plan, I do want to kind of just go back over that a bit because we are now combining 2 projects. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. So the proposed prior master plan had $27 million in it. Today I'm going to ask you to look at incorporating into that the police evidence storage facility, which is being presented at $10.3 million. So we talk about the prior master plan. We're not talking $27 million in the past to $27 million today. Really, the prior master plan would have been a $37 million project. And just to so you understand it, there are a variety of funding sources that go into it. General government has the general obligation bonds. It comes out of the general government or general facilities capacity. We had proposed that for about $9 million. The three enterprise funds, transportation, solid waste, and water services, were $6 million each, and those were enterprise funds, and that made up the one project that totaled $27 million, and we called that the operations campus. We are now looking at adding in there, though, the police evidence storage, which is, again, general obligation bonds, but it's using the public safety capacity, and it's $10.3 million is what that capital project is being presented at. And in the past, depending on where we put that, we would potentially have to look at land purchase. So I did throw that on the slide. But this is what we had presented to council in the past for the prior master plan. It's also in line with what prior consultants and others had estimated back in the early 2000s for what the second and third phases of that complex construction would cost. So where is the master plan or the complex? The Glendale Operations Campus sits just less than a mile to the west of us here. It sits at 62nd Avenue in Myrtle, and it's shown by that star on the map here. And that's really, while it's in the heart of Glendale, it's the other side of the railroad tracks and in kind of a industrial area. What really makes it unique, though, is it is almost in the center of town. It's 14 miles from the Pyramid Peak Water Treatment Plant, and it's also 14 miles from Loop 303. And that's pretty significant in the sense that if I was asked today to site and we wanted one complex to serve the city, this is the location we would be in. It's kind of a central location, and so when you're sending somebody, it's equidistant to others, to the far ends of the city. And so it is really in an optimum location. The other thing that makes this site applicable for an operations campus is it's zoned that way. This is what the land is zoned as. So for us to be an operations campus or continue, we don't have to change with the zoning. It's also then right next to the railroad tracks. So if we are looking at true warehouse type functions or delivery of certain things, it is very convenient. And right next to the railroad tracks is Grand Avenue, which gives us nice access up to the 101. But again, it's that central part of the city. And it's also very set up in the sense that we've already purchased the land, and it exists if we want to expand the operations on the campus or build out the campus. As far as the current use goes, there are 300 people plus that stage out of this campus every day. So the building, and we've got two colors of buildings shown there. I did unfortunately call them buildings more than a half century old in the grayish color. They're not all a half century old, but they're getting close to it. So on the, look over here, there's Spring City on the bottom center. That's the oldest building on the campus. That is currently used today for storage. Larger building, over 90,000 square feet, one level, and is used for storage. And it's multiple departments that use it, primarily other than the true warehouse type function that's under water services, but they do general city. It is police, fire, and solid waste that are in there, and water services is a large component as well. Just north of that, the building right there is the newer warehouse. It's shown in a light blue color. That was constructed in 2004, 2005. The other buildings that were constructed is just south of that one. There's a transit building, and then the large building, fleet services. So fleet's a rather large building. We do large truck repairs over here, and then light duty trucks and vehicles over here. So the other things I want to point out on this is solid waste. All our solid waste drivers, the people that go out and do all the house calls, pick up all the residential trash, are staged out of this trailer up here on the northwest corner. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But really the reason these people are on the campus, you think of like a streets equipment operator. He comes in the morning and his work's programmed out for him by a supervisor or up to the director, and he gets in his piece of equipment, and it's stored somewhere on this campus. He then goes over to the material storage. So let's say he's going to go out and fill potholes. He's going to go to that location, pick up the mix he needs, and go out and do his work for the day. So everything he needs is staged on this campus. If he needs gas or fuel in the morning, and just so you know, our solid waste vehicles do fuel every day. So they do need fuel every day, and we would have to stage them at a location or dispatch them from a location where they do have the fuel. And then it allows him to come back at the end of the day, clean off his equipment, and get it ready and prep for the next. Other people that touch this campus, this is where Parks Maintenance is also staged out of, so they have a lot of their equipment and material they need for all their use every day. Transportation Services, pretty much all the department is also located here, as is the Field Operations Department, so the Facilities Maintenance is staged out of here, Solid Waste, like I just discussed, and Fleet. The only people that aren't here is the landfill, because they're actually at the landfill. So it's street maintenance, right-of-way maintenance, signs and markings, water services, the divisions that do water meter reading, that do water line maintenance and repairs. Fire has significant storage location on this campus, and then parks maintenance, transit, warehouse, stormwater. So a lot of people use this campus every day. The Spring City warehouse I just spoke about, back when staff presented to council in 2002 and council approved a new master plan at the time, they discussed Spring City and how at the time Spring City was nearing the end of its life. And so at that point in time, it was council's direction to staff that a new warehouse be built. And based upon that, this building has not been maintained. This is, the top picture there shows the frontage of the building as you would drive past it on Myrtle. It's a brick building, and it has a lot of air conditioning system that doesn't work, staged up on the roof today. If we were building this building, we would not allow this. We would have to have some sort of parapet so you could not see this air conditioning equipment from the road. The picture on the bottom corner, on the left corner, is a closer view of the air conditioning equipment, and you see much of it is missing. The inside guts of the equipment, per se, is gone, and then the roof is in very poor condition. So much so if you look at the picture on the bottom right, that's the inside picture looking up to the roof, and you can see that much of it is collapsing on the inside. The other thing we have on this campus is temporary trailers. This is where we stage or we dispatch or house our solid waste and water services staff. I was able to find an article from 2002 from the city relay where they talked about a fire in solid waste, and some staff lost some garbage truck type toys. But that's when their structure was burned down, and the city opted to put it in temporary trailers to house this staff out of until phase 2 of the master plan hit in about 2008 or 9, so these people could live in permanent structures. And the really sad part of that story is that, with the economy doing what it did back then, we deferred that. And so we actually have solid waste in this one trailer here. I do want to point out, though, there's 2 different flooring colors, and that was done because this section of the floor, the lighter color portion of the floor, actually collapsed and fell through a couple years ago. So a temporary repair was done such that we could house these people out of that building. The other thing I do want to point out, though, if you look at that room, that's the meeting room in that building. That's less than 400 square feet. That's significantly less than the room we're in today. It's actually smaller than that conference room on the 4th floor. And yet, 45 staff a day between the hours of 5 and 5:30 a.m. are given their daily work assignments out of that room. And it's cramped to the point that we can't even do training in there today. We can't pull all the people in. Based upon its square footage, we should have up to 8 or 9 people in the room. So instead, we've had to pivot, and we actually do all our safety training here, as shown in this picture. It's outside, and we're using the side of a garbage truck to display information on. We've done this now with the pandemic ongoing. Before, we would crowd people in the room, we'd meet outside and discuss things, or we have to get a room such as this one or up at the main library if we actually want to hold some sort of technical training or required type training. But this is how staff is required to work today. Some of the other structures I'm going to talk about in a little bit are, they continue to be unused structures that exist on campus. The picture on the left is an old transfer station. The city used this and abandoned this in about 2004. And in the past, when solid waste was picked up differently, with it being more manual labor, they would bring the trucks back to this location as it was a central location. The trucks would dump and they would load it onto a larger truck and transfer it out to the landfill. They also used this for a while when we were doing a pilot of a recycling program to see if it worked. But this structure has been abandoned and not used since 2004. The other one next to it is a paint booth. The city used to do all its auto body repairs in-house. So if a vehicle was in an accident, it would repair the vehicle and it would paint it in-house. In 2004, the city changed the way it operated, and it outsourced parts function and it outsourced auto body repairs. So this paint booth has no longer been used since then, and there's nothing in these locations other than accumulation, and some of it is things that it's there because we've got the space, and it probably shouldn't be there. We do have, though, inside the transfer station, there's some fire equipment there. It's needed and it's used on an occasional type basis, and by that I mean not every day, but still probably once or twice a year, so the fire department needs it, and it's kept in a secure location, but covered so it's out of the sun. So covered storage is good, but you don't need the ramp next to it and associated with it. A couple other buildings I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and I wanted to just show you pictures of. These are some office and mixed-use buildings. These are some of the ones that were constructed in 1976. So the one kind of on the top is an office building. It's got some meeting space in it. If you look at the concrete structure, concrete tilt walls, it's nice structure. The bones are good, and so we want to look at repurposing this one. Same with the picture on the bottom right corner. The only difference with that building is most of it does not have air conditioning in today. So while it's still got some nice structure to it, we may want to look at a different use for that building in the future. So just to let you know, though, the building on the top is where we've got streets and right-of-way today, and then on the bottom right is parks, and then towards the north end of that building, the far end of that building, is transportation is in there. And just when we talk about adaptive reuse or what we could change these buildings into, I did want to show you, this is Peoria's operations campus. This is 4 or 5 years old. So we don't have to look at a Taj Mahal or an expensive type looking building. It can be a very utilitarian building. It doesn't have to be a warehouse because we are going to have some offices in it, but I did want to show you Peoria does have a relatively new operations campus. It sits about 4 or 5 miles away from us, and we've been over, we've toured it, and they're doing what we propose to do. They've got multiple departments in this building such that the space is used most of the day and you don't have the building sitting vacant for the large portion of the day. So since 2018, or one of the requests was, look at future needs and look at future potentials for this space. So one of the things we wanted to do is make sure we look at what's effective, efficient, and workable space, and primarily for the 4 large groups that are there today. And that's water services, who are in one of those temporary trailers, actually several of those temporary trailers, solid waste, who's also in those temporary trailers, transportation, and then parks maintenance staff. So how do they operate? What do they need to do? I give you the story of a street maintenance employee. You don't want his truck parked on one side of the campus and then the materials he needs to go pick up on the other side of the campus. You want to look at where the drive lanes are, and is his storage relatively close to where his truck is, so we can spend less time essentially on the overhead type tasks of prepping and getting ready for work, and actually more time out doing the work. So we spent a long time looking at that. We then looked at consolidation of police evidence storage into one location. I'm saying consolidation because currently today, police evidence storage sits outside on the operations campus. It sits inside the Spring City warehouse. It sits inside the main police station, and there's also then satellite sites at the other stations. But I think if we asked Chief Briggs, he would say it's primarily the main police station. So having it in multiple locations, we might make them more efficient. And what we're proposing is make them more efficient by consolidating it to one location. So they've got staff at the one location. It adds security by having it at the one location instead of multiple. And then also look at, could we possibly expand it in the future as the city grows, as evidence storage requirements change. I know I had a conversation with the city clerk on even paper evidence or paper storage, record storage, and it changes over time. And so we need to think about that too. As certain vehicles are involved in different types of accidents, they may be required to be around and stored longer. And the other thing we wanted to consider was what else could we do? And we looked at potential consolidation of Fire Resources Center. And by consolidation, again, I'm saying move them to one location. We've got Chief Garrison and Chief Gustafson with us today, and in discussions with them and talking about how we take care of fire and fire stations in the future, we found out that they actually have to store equipment at different stations across the city. Not that that's where their needs are, but that's where they've got the space available. And we really thought to make them much more efficient, we should do it the other way around. We should put the equipment in a space where they know where it is. They can go to the one space to grab equipment. So you think about the fire captain working on a Saturday evening. He has a need for a specialized piece of equipment. He doesn't have to go looking to see where it might be stored. He should know where it's stored and be able to go to the one location to pick it up. But the other thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, is really that adjacency to fleet services. The fire staff that get these the fire vehicles ready to be out on the front line every day are in and out of the fleet services building several times a day. We thought we might be able to make them more efficient. So that's one thing we're going to discuss a little bit later and see if there's consideration for doing this in the future. The other thing we want to look at is there potential to alleviate some of the stress at City Hall? We look at it where City Hall really should be the city's showcase facility. It should be the one that we're using for economic development and those sorts of things. If that's truly what we want it for, should we be having field staff there? So if you look at an engineering inspector or a code compliance officer, these people come into the building at the beginning of the day, they grab their assignments for the day, and then they spend the majority of the day in the field. And with modern technology, we have laptops in their vehicles. Could they not be doing all that from the field? But then you potentially don't want somebody coming in if they've just done a field job, and engineering inspectors may not do this, or code compliance officers may not do this. But if you've had somebody in a trench repairing a water pipe, you probably don't want them then walking through City Hall at the end of the day. City Hall should have those fixtures and finishes that are representative of our business-critical buildings. And people with dirt on their shoes should probably be walking through a field-type building. So we looked at it from both perspectives. Should these people be at City Hall? And also, would they not be more efficient on the operations campus? So it's a consideration that I'm going to discuss with council here in a bit. So here's our proposed phased master plan, and this is staff's recommendation to council today. So I've called it phase 1A and 1B in the sense that they can both be done at the same time. One can start early and one can start later, and that's why I've got two phases that are kind of phase 1. But really, this is a high priority, and the intent here is to create space for water services. This is the meter readers, the water line repairs, the people that work in transportation, the signs, signals, street lighting, street maintenance, right-of-way maintenance, park maintenance, the staff that goes out and mows the grass, repairs the amenities at parks, and solid waste. And what this does, we're going to create a building. We're recommending we create a building up on the northwest corner of the campus. There's a fence between the building to separate personal vehicle parking from city vehicle parking, and just provides a little bit more security. And with this phase, we would get rid of all those temporary trailers. So all our staff that today are in temporary trailers would go away at the end of this phase. This building could also create space for other staff. And this is what I just discussed, that alleviates stress at City Hall. These people don't need a lot of space, but today each one of them has a dedicated workstation. So our model for the future is to give them the shareable workspace. And so essentially we create new space for them and could allow then for us to facilitate the remodel at City Hall much easier. Well, there's still a plan being developed, and we think we've got a plan for where these people could go and how we could vacate a floor at City Hall. Doing this would alleviate that stress and would then also provide for future growth.
Vice Mayor?
If I could just, there's 3 groups that I'm actually talking about with this. It's the code compliance, the building inspectors, and the engineering street inspectors. And all directors over those areas would agree that this may be a better location for them.
Councilmember Clark?
Thank you. What's the estimated square footage of this proposed building and the estimated cost at this point?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, the estimated cost for this building and then all the associated demolitions that have to happen, the site improvements, getting site utilities over there. So we have to add water, sewer, electricity over to this area. If we go later on to, I just want to make sure I get the numbers right, to slide 25. So the cost with this are $11.8 million. But again, that includes all the demolition and all the other stuff associated with that. So it's not just the building, it's the entire work. And the building is, and again, this is a high-level programming phase. So, the next step after this is to actually get with the directors and other people to make sure the building's right-sized. The building right now is approximately 50,000 square feet. It is a single-story building, so we're adding new driveways for access off of Orangewood, and again, creating that additional site security with this.
So let me ask a curious, but perhaps dumb question. If the estimated cost, and I realize these are ballpark numbers that you're giving me, is $11.8 million for a 50,000 square foot building, what's the cost per square foot to build and and that includes your demolishing and your relocation of utilities, but give me some kind of general idea of what the cost is per square foot.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, it's right in that $200 per square foot when you back out some of the utilities. So it's still in that utilitarian type range.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just confirming.
Councilmember Tomachoff, did you?
20 a square foot.
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tomashoff, I backed out some of the utilities to get approximately $200 a square foot. So, I think at 11.8, it comes down to 236 per square foot, but that's not all just building.
I mean, that you can build a pretty nice building at that price per square foot. I mean, it's put some really nice finishes in it, because this isn't including land cost either. This is just the building, right?
Vice Mayor and council members, it's the building, it's the utilities. You got to remember, we don't have water or sewer there, so we have to trench and take them there. It's the fence work associated with it and the demolition of the existing buildings, and then it's paving of the parking lots too.
Okay.
So it's all that included
All
in
right.
there.
Vice Mayor, if I could continue,
Yes.
my question actually was, so you're proposing that this field staff building is a shared workspace for parks, transportation, part of development services, building safety and code?
So Vice Mayor and Councilmember Tomashoff, just to be completely clear, it would be intended day one for water services, transportation, parks maintenance, and solid waste, but it would have the flexibility and ability to accommodate staff such as the engineering inspectors, the code compliance inspectors and the building inspectors as well.
That's what I'm kind of wondering, and I asked this question yesterday when you walked me through this, is that if we're going to be divvying up the cost, then, you know, transportation, solid waste, they're all sharing in the cost of this building. So if the intent is to put other departments in this building, I would think we would be distributing the cost among everyone, not just enterprise funds. And then the general fund, basically, I guess, off the top of the general fund, rather than allocating it to, you know, in the CIP for parks and other places for their contribution for their part of whatever the costs are, rather than basically just taking it off the top of the general fund.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomashoff, the way we allocated costs for this building was, for the building itself, it was based upon a per square footage. So there was kind of 3 different levels of employee that went into it. And it was that true field employee that would take up almost no square footage, but needed some sort of footprint in a training room, a meeting room, that type thing. Then there was the employee that needed a place to sit down and potentially go through work orders and that type stuff. And then it went up to a supervisor or somebody at that level that might need an office. So we looked at those type levels, and in discussions with the directors on who might need what. That's how we apportioned out the building. There are a lot of other site costs, though, that went direct to those enterprise funds. So, for example, solid waste wanted a wash rack for their trucks, so that is 100% solid waste. Transportation needs those material bins, so that's 100% transportation. So we did look at it that way, and if you look at those departments that we discussed that are in City Hall today, the engineering inspectors, they need none of those amenities. They don't need material storage on site. They don't need heavy-duty place to store their vehicles. So they didn't get those additional costs. So there was a extensive allocation of costs when we looked at it. Those costs will be refined and split out more when we actually get into the full design and are able to say, this department gets 1 office or this department gets 2 offices, then we'll do a better distribution of costs.
Okay, Vice Mayor, if I could continue then, because on page, and because we went through this yesterday, on page 25, the cost is $3.5 million for water services, solid waste, and transportation. And, you know, based on the different needs for office space, it's just awfully odd to me that the cost allocation is exactly identical to all 3 of those. And then GO bonds, general government, basically, I don't know who that covers, parks or whatever. But if we're going to be divvying up the costs for workspace, I just feel like it should be part of that department's cap budget and not just off the top of the general fund.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomashoff, we can certainly, as we go into project development, and if we move forward with doing this, we can work with the council to do a more exact breakdown or try to get some direction from the council on this. Cost allocation models are an inexact science. And so what staff has done, I think, is a very good job of at least trying to get it within the realm of, does it seem reasonable? So looking at the use of the space and accounting for a little bit lighter use of the cost to somebody who's only there for a short period of time versus somebody who's domiciling, working full-time. They've tried to make those adjustments and then those unique elements. But that will be brought back when we have a financing plan. When we get the project going, we can break that down into more detail and show you how the Budget and Finance Department's proposing that we pay for this.
Thank you, yeah, because I would be looking for something where I mean, I don't care the formula and all of that, doesn't really matter to me. It's for it to be fair. But if, you know, transportation, I mean, we're trying our hardest to, you know, water services had a lot of infrastructure. So all these other departments have a lot of infrastructure needs. And I just want to make sure that it's also fair, that it comes out of the budget of the departments that are going to be using the facility, whatever that amount is, not just off the top of the general fund.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomashoff, actually, we don't have the option with enterprise funds of just arbitrarily picking a number off. We have to make sure that whatever we charge to that department is fair to the ratepayers, because that's generally where, for example, within our solid waste and within other water services, that's actually built into the rate structure. So we have to build a justification for how we charge things out, and we do that on a regular basis. So we'll make sure to, when we bring this back as part of a more detailed project, we'll make sure we have that discussion with the council and make sure to answer all your questions.
I didn't say arbitrary. I never said the word arbitrary. But my point is that the other departments that were listed that are going to be using this facility are not listed in the cost-sharing model that you're showing us. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Before you go on, I want to
Councilmember
get a
Donner?
clarification on Councilmember Tomachoff's concern, where the GO bond is government. I mean, this is a capital expenditure project, so it'd be a CIP. I don't think it'd ever come out of a department's budget, from what I understand, unless I'm wrong. Would this not be a capital improvement project that we approve as a council? It doesn't necessarily come out of the budget per se of a department. Oh, okay, within the CIP. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So the next phase then, we're calling it 1B again because it could happen concurrently with 1A, it could start sooner, or it could start slightly later. So we showed it, but it's not dependent on anything else to happen on the property. Like I don't have to demo a building for it to occur, and that's why it's in a phase 1 type structure. This is a police evidence building. And again, it's, as we discussed earlier, it's consolidation of police evidence storage, which is currently on those other locations, or 2 locations on the operations campus on main PSB, to take it into this one location. The one thing this does for us then too is it allows then for us to get into the main police station and do some retro work and provide for that remodel. We did look at other locations. This one was deemed by the police department to be the most advantageous location, and it really is. It's the location of the campus. It's a central location. It's distance from Foothills and Gateway. It's relative close location to the main campus. It does offer security then because we have other staff working on the site. So it's already on a secure campus, but it becomes more secured on that campus. There's also adequate land space here to add the exterior storage of vehicles that the police department is looking for. In discussions with the police department today, they're just over an acre of exterior storage, and we're looking at expanding that to 2 acres to allow them a better location. The other thing this has for us is that we own the land, so it's not like we have to go buy land for the police evidence storage location. As council asked a couple years ago, we did look at other locations that the city owns. The one location we looked at is the prosecutor. We just moved them out of their trailers, and that location there has half an acre, so we could not get police evidence storage to consolidate them into one location. We could not get them there today.
Mayor, if I could.
Go ahead,
interrupt.
Councilmember.
Thank you. I mentioned this yesterday, actually prior to yesterday. While this is city-owned, it is owned by Water Services. So I know that there's discussions happening, but I mean, there's firewalls essentially between enterprise funds and general fund. So, and that definitely would have something to do with the cost if you're not able to relocate that then, because the Water Services is funded by rates. So just wanted to point that out.
Mayor, oops. Hello? Oh. Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff. So there isn't really anything except council policy that would dictate that you cannot transfer any type of property between an enterprise fund and the general fund. So in fact, there are some cities within the valley that use their enterprise funds to supplement their general fund. So it would be a matter of policy to say that we wouldn't transfer that property. But having said that, because Water Services is a part of this campus, we look at it holistically. So once the campus is built, water will have its share of it. Field operations and solid waste and the other enterprise funds will have their share of it, and so will the general fund. And so going back to the one thing that was said earlier, we'll look at what's the appropriate way to allocate those costs between all of those different users of the campus and do it in an, excuse me, in an equitable, in an equitable manner that reflects their usage of the campus. But the land will be taken into account in that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I do, thank you. How much did Water Services pay for that property?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, I do not have that number off the top of my head. I'd have to get back to you. Oh, it appears Mr. Johnson knows.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, we paid $1.5 million in 2005.
Thank you. I get, the point is, I just don't want that to be backfilled by ratepayers, because that would be the issue, is that, you know, came out of Water Services and wouldn't want to have the ratepayers to have to compensate for that. So,
Yes.
and as far as I know, we have done a few transactions that were Water Services owned properties before, and we were careful to make sure that that money from those land transactions went back to Water Services. So I was not aware that that wasn't a policy, and I don't know whether that's a discussion the council wants to have. But I thought that we did have that policy, because I think every transaction that we've done, that when the property was owned by Water Services or an enterprise fund, that the money has gone back to an enterprise fund.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. If Water bought property and then we sold the property subsequently, we put that money back in the enterprise fund. I'm simply saying there is no law, rule, anything that prevents you from doing it otherwise, other than our normal policy, which that's what we've always done. But if you wanted to do it differently at the direction of the council, you could. It's not illegal in any manner. That was my point.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Well, Councilmember Turner?
Thank you, sir. Two things to follow up on this discussion about the Water Services Fund. Would the purchase of that property through or other properties through bond indebtedness put more of a restriction on what happened to the property should we decide to repurpose it?
Mayor or Vice Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. In the case that we use certain types of debt instruments to purchase land and or other things, then there can be restrictions as to what you can do with the proceeds of a sale of that subsequently. It varies by type of bond and by the bond documents that were put into place as you sold the bond, sometimes referred to as covenants. So depending on the situation, we would have to go back and look at, if it was bonded, then how is it going to work in the case that we sell a property. It varies from bond deal to bond deal, is what I'm telling you.
Vice Mayor, Ms. Rios, thank you, because I was under the same impression that was described by Councilmember Tomachoff as far as what we had, the restrictions that might be in place in our past practices. So it's good to know that there is, in fact, some kind of linkage that pops up at times that does bind us a little more than at others. So to move on to my initial question here, though, is in regards to the police evidence building, could we have a little explanation of how that building, wherever it would be located, functions? It was mentioned that, oh, it's great because it's equidistant from Foothills and Gateway, but how much traffic, is that a regular thing, that evidence goes back and forth between police stations and the lockers, or does most of, for instance, I'll throw out some questions and you can, to give you a start, and you can continue, but it's like, does the evidence generally just go back and forth between city court and the evidence, or does it go down to Superior Court for trials down there? I don't really know how that process functions, and maybe we would all benefit from knowing a little more about it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner. So to answer your question, each subdivision, so the Foothills and Gateway subdivision, have temporary storage for evidence that officers can log evidence into. And on a daily basis, that evidence is picked up by our evidence custodians and brought back to what is now our main evidence storage at the main station. An officer also has the ability to go to the main station. So if they're booking a prisoner into the jail, which is located at the basement level of the main station, they can go upstairs and log evidence into the main property room at the main station. And there are temporary storage lockers in the main station as well. So the evidence custodians take the evidence out of those temporary lockers on a daily basis and put them into more permanent storage. Unless it is a large item, like a bicycle or something that would need to be stored on the loading dock, or a vehicle, let's say. If a vehicle is evidence, we have a bay that we can store the vehicle into until detectives can get to it. If it's a bicycle, then we have a cage located on the back dock that officers can log the bicycle into directly, and it doesn't need to be touched by an evidence custodian. The evidence custodians don't often remove evidence from permanent storage unless it's requested to be removed by a detective or an officer who's a case agent, and there's been a request from an attorney through a court process that evidence be brought into the court for a hearing. If that happens, then the officer or detective notifies property and evidence ahead of time that those items are pulled, they're set aside in kind of a temporary storage again, and then the officer or detective collects that, signs it out, takes it to court, signs it into the court, and sometimes the court will maintain that evidence throughout the duration of a trial. Other times it's released back into the officer or detective's custody and brought back to our permanent storage facility. And that's both city court and superior court. Were there other pieces to the question that I've missed?
That's an extremely good summary, and I appreciate the education. How many employees do we, if it's not confidential, how many employees do we have in the evidence department?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I believe we have one supervisor and 5 property evidence custodians, and then a contract employee that is responsible for purging evidence. So that contract employee, his only job is to go through old evidence and figure out what we can discard and or sell at auction.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor,
Councilmember Clark?
same questions as I asked about the previous slide. Estimated square footage, estimated cost, and estimated cost per square foot.
Vice Mayor, council members, Councilmember Clark, so don't look at the size of the building as it's shown, what we were just trying to show there without getting the font too small where you couldn't read it. So it's not accurate on the map or on the legend here. That building is 30,000 square feet. The cost for this building is $10.3 million, and it did not include land. It does include, as Mr. St. John was just saying, it does include a loading dock. It does include a bay for vehicles. It includes secured storage in the back. It's $343 per square foot if you look at the cost as being a per square foot cost of the building.
Why is it so much higher? Is it because it requires more security components that are expensive?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, it does include a lot of security. It does have a loading dock that the other building wouldn't have. That cost includes racks for storage. There's a room where they come in to book. So it's based upon costs that Surprise is currently today. They just entered into a contract for their police evidence building, and we used that as a per square foot cost to actually cost out the building. The other building we looked at was much more utilitarian. It's got rooms and some offices and this type of thing. This one is truly set up like an evidence storage building.
Okay. And then my final question. If you go back to, gosh, I have to put my glasses on. Back to slide 5, says this facility would be paid out of police, or out of go bonds, 10.3 million plus land purchase. It wouldn't be a land purchase anymore, but there would be reimbursement to water for their share of paying for the site. Would that be correct?
So Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, this slide depicts the prior master plan. At that point there, we put in the general obligation bonds under public safety, a police evidence storage, and we had 10.3 million in. At the time, we noted it would not include a land purchase. By being able to put this building on this piece of property, we potentially do not have to do a land purchase, and that's all we were trying to note there.
But we would have to reimburse the owner of the property, which would be the Water Enterprise Fund, for their cost for the purchase of that land, would we not?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, when I looked at it proportionally, and I'll go back to this slide, you know, 5 acres of the 42 acres were purchased directly by water. The rest of the land, we can do research on this, but we believe was purchased through the general fund or general obligation bonds. We don't know. And so we would look at that model, as Ms. Rios just suggested, and come back to you with that.
I think that's really important, that I don't think there's any objection to the project per se, but there are these little sticky issues, sticky wickets, that we have to clean up, and I believe this one would be one of them. So getting a report back on exactly how the cost for the land would be allocated is important. Thank you.
Vice Mayor, I'd like to call Deputy City Manager St. John up. One of the things that makes this very, a little bit more expensive as compared to the other building is the refrigeration requirements. And I think you only understand how bad our need is when you understand kind of what we're doing currently for refrigeration. Much evidence has to be, by law, has to be kept in a controlled environment for evidence. So maybe, Rick, if you maybe kind of walk through that component of which is an expensive part of the construction.
Mr. City Manager, Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. One of the big components and one of the big issues that we've had since I was an assistant chief in the police department, which, so going back to about 2012-13 time period, we ran out of space for refrigeration, and there are requirements with certain types of cases, sex assaults, for example, that you maintain DNA evidence in perpetuity. And so you end up having to keep evidence for 99 plus years in some cases. And so you end up running out of cold storage fairly quickly, over time, of course. And in about 2012, 2013, we ran into some space needs and had to expand property evidence in a way that isn't necessarily ideal for the current function of that building. So our old briefing room, which I used as a briefing room in my younger years as a police officer, is now part of our cold evidence storage. It's very secure, it's lockable, it's safe. The evidence is safe. I don't mean to suggest otherwise. But it's not the ideal way that you would maintain property evidence in a police facility, to be parsing it out into different parts of the building.
Thank you, Mr. St. John. If I might follow up with one. I believe that fire also has a need for cold storage. Don't they store some pharmaceuticals and vaccines in cold storage? Would that be part of the component of the cold storage of the police department? Or do we have to find an entirely new area for fire to store, cold store?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I have the fire department here to clarify if I misstate something, but I believe the cold storage that we use are primarily on the engines and the ladders, so that they're taken into the field in cold storage. Now there may be some cold storage at within the stations or at the resource center. We can look into what they use cold storage for in those fixed facilities to see if there's some way to combine those functions to save money. But at this point, I wouldn't know the answer to that question.
And nor do I, but I think it's worth looking at, seeing if we can do two things at once. Thank you, Mr. St. John.
Thank you. Do have one more question on the police evidence. Is the building going to have the capacity for expansion? And is there going to be a forensics lab or what, I mean, at some point, just want to, for growth and as things, I don't even know how we do our forensics. I think we send everything out, don't we?
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, we do currently use the DPS, or Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, for our DNA and other forensics. We do in-house fingerprinting and ballistics. The property evidence as it's constructed in the design that Ms. Wojtanko is sharing with you today would be sufficient long-term. We wouldn't need to grow the space more than likely long-term now. In the long term, so 20, 30 years down the road, there may be a need for an expansion, but at least in the immediate long-term, this facility would suffice, and it does have ample space for a crime lab, and that is something that Chief Briggs and I are in discussion on when is the appropriate time to build that into the CIP and begin talking about a lab that services the citizens of Glendale.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Aldama?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Wow, it's pretty evident that our city staff have checked every single box, every question that's been asked, and some prudent questions have been answered. I think the only thing left is some finances that you'll bring back. I'm really excited about this project. It's time that we turn a corner. It's time that we value our staff. They've been working in trailers and, frankly, out of their trucks. So I'm really supportive of it. I feel like we need to move forward with this. And again, turn a page. City of Peoria, City of Almiraj, City of Surprise. Everybody is building out their complexes, and it's really, really time that we're a little behind the ball. And so I'm really supportive of this. And thank you, staff, for checking all the boxes and making sure all those questions were answered. And really good job. And it sounds like the experts are at the forefront. We are certainly not the experts at facilities. While that is my day job, boy, you've checked all the boxes. One question I do have, though, is similar to the question on the lab with the HVAC. This does include all FF&D for any building that you're proposing, correct?
Vice Mayor and council members, Councilmember Aldama, yes, it includes, as you do with capital of building, you put everything into it. So what I was trying to get there with police evidence storage is it's not just a shell of a building. We've got all the equipment programmed in that they potentially need. Things may change over the next couple of years as we construct, but yes, all the FF&E is included in this.
And that's quite a bit of money there on furniture and equipment for those who are watching. FF&D, furniture, fixture, and equipment. Turnkey project, inside and out. And then can you talk a little bit about on the purple or blue page up on top, you've got new ingress and egress going out to Orangewood rather than to Myrtle, is that correct?
Vice Mayor and council members, Councilmember Aldama, yeah, absolutely correct. So some of the things that we should point out, I'm just going to go to this screen over here for you for my ease because I can't see the other one. These buildings over here, these trailers, these actually are demolished as part of that Phase 1A. And then if you look at, and I'll go back over this other one here, there's an extra entrance and exit. So there's two extra added up here, and that gets all these personal vehicles in and out of Orangewood, and then all the city vehicles that are parked here and on the rest of the campus will continue to use this Orangewood exit as a primary exit. The Myrtle entrance is there for emergency, and then we've got public access here for police evidence storage. Occasionally members of the public do have to come pick up evidence. So we are attempting to divert all traffic to Orangewood where possible.
Good, Vice Mayor, if I may continue, which is good for, there's a lot of residents that live along Myrtle Avenue. It's a heavy industrial area, but there's families that live in 1, 2, 3 different housing areas. There's some townhomes. There's some homes, standard regular residential homes, and there's the trailer park. So there's a significant amount of traffic there we can reduce. And it is a school zone, I believe. Several years ago, the city picked up that area and added the sidewalks. Last observation is thank you for repurposing areas around the city. So you're going to move some of those code enforcements perhaps from City Hall to an area where they can simply just come pick up their work orders and leave. We want them out on the streets. We don't want them in their offices. Question, though, is as we move forward, COVID unfortunately has showed us how to work from home. And till this day, many staff are still working from home. So I hope that city manager, your staff, as we go to build out, that we'll start to take that into consideration. Really, what is the city's plan to start working from home and not have any more offices? But that's not for today. I just wanted to make sure that we start thinking that way. Great plan. I'm excited about this. Can't wait for it to take off if that's the will of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So to continue on with the program, we then have our next phase. I'm calling it Phase 2. Again, it's really a third phase, but the first two phases can happen simultaneously. We can call them Phase 1 if we want to. This next phase, we're calling it adaptive reuse. And really, this suggestion came to us from council when we sat here in September 2018. They asked us, this group of buildings that I've got the number 2 over in the bottom corner, could we not do something with those buildings? Can those buildings not be used? And so we looked at each of those buildings. They've got good structure, but they need some infrastructure updates. And by that I mean they need some ADA improvements so they're compliant with the building codes. They need fire suppression system. They need things like that. But we're looking to potentially repurpose these areas. And Councilmember Clark, before you get there, I do have your numbers and that ready for you. But we're looking at taking these buildings that have good structure and potentially repurposing them. And this is what I showed you before with that City of Peoria building too. Could we take a building like this and create an adaptive reuse? So somebody just asked, could we create refrigerated storage for fire? Well, fire, we're planning on adding some storage capability to them, to this building B down in here. It's a nice tall second story or 2-story almost building, so it has some nice higher racks. We could create some storage there. By doing it in this phase, we then are able to take some of the material out of Spring City, put it in police evidence storage, rebuild some of these buildings, pull the rest of the material out of Spring City, and get the storage and the offices that are needed on this site constructed for much less than building new buildings. So I'm just looking for my numbers. We do go through numbers a little bit later on. So this construction phase, we'll go through this on slide 27, is estimated to cost today at $2.7 million. And this is what it does for updating those buildings. And it does a little bit as well as we create space for the exterior storage as well. And this is just under $100 per square foot to rebuild these buildings. What this also does, the other two buildings were more per square foot because we also had to do underground utilities. We had to add electric to these buildings, water and sewer. These buildings already have that. We probably have to upgrade the electricity to the buildings at service entrance. We have to add the fire suppression, but the utilities come to the site today, and that's part of the savings.
Vice Mayor?
Go ahead.
Talk about phasing for a minute. You probably plan to later on, most likely, and I'm jumping the gun. But how long do you anticipate phase 1A and 1B taking, and at what point would you start phase 2 or any subsequent phases?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, that's a great question. We've been working on that recently. Where we know how long it might take to construct a building. What we now have to figure out is the process we go through. When we go through, the hiring of a design consultant, getting the design done, bidding it, and we're working on that. But that's what we're proposing is, if you're okay with this, let us now put the costs in the appropriate year, in the right year in the capital plan. So we're thinking currently, next fiscal year, we would complete design, and then the following year, phase construction over phase 1A and 1B, and that probably is going to take us 18 months. And then we're going to start into this phase 2. So we're looking at, from today, almost 3 years to get into phase 2. And I'm also proposing that we do this phase in several phases. We don't go in and do it all at once. And the reason for that is we're going to use some of these buildings. They're existing office buildings today. We're going to use them as office buildings in the future, and we need some place to move these people to while we rebuild this building and put it back. So I can't do all these buildings at once. I probably have to stage it. And we're working through that final plan now.
Good answer, thank you.
This next slide shows, this is an existing building on site today. This is one of the buildings that we're looking at potentially repurposing. We call this one Building O. Part of it is 2-story, part of it is 1-story. And again, we're not looking at building a Taj Mahal. We're looking at, updating the building, turning it into something that's not such an eyesore, but make it workable for the staff that work there today. Keep the evaporative cooled spaces, storage, and air conditioning where you actually have true office space. So again, just an industrial building, an industrial looking building, but also that it looks like it does value our employees. So the next phase we've got planned and recommended is a demolition phase. So there's 2 major areas we would demolish as part of this. Now that we've created the storage where we can actually move police evidence out of Spring City, we can move the fire storage out of it and put them into building B. We can now take and demolish the Spring City building, kind of in the middle southern part of the campus. Rather large building, but again, this is the one that was built in the 1950s. And then we can also demolish those buildings I showed you earlier. This is the transfer station and the paint booth. And this really, now we can talk about adequate circulation. We can talk about how an employee comes to work, where they get their equipment, and how they leave. And we're looking at all sorts of different efficiencies with this phase. And it gets rid of those buildings that are just old buildings that have no current use. So that paint booth, we can't take and repurpose it into another use. And the transfer station with that, the place where you load a truck in the past, it easily cannot be retrofitted into a current use. And so we're looking at demolishing those. And with that, I'd like to talk to you about a potential use for it.
Vice Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Clark.
before you talk about your potential use, the first thought that sprang to my mind is that you said you've got about 300 people that work at this site on a daily basis. And I'm looking at Spring City, that space going away. Wouldn't it make a great space for some kind of food court or some kind of facility where these 300 people that are on campus can go and buy their lunch or breakfast or whatever during the course of the day? And have you ever thought about something as mundane as that?
Vice Mayor and Councilmember Clark, I'm not going to speak for the other departments. It's one of those things that we'll add into that next stage before we actually get into true design. But I'll talk about it as part of solid waste. I send my employees out in the morning, they leave, and I really don't want to see them again back at this site until the end of the day. I want them out in the road, picking up garbage, going to the landfill, and then coming back at the end of the day. And when you look at, there's certain days of the week, Wednesday, we're in the far north end of the city. I don't want them driving back to this campus for lunch, but I'm not going to speak for the other areas.
Well, that is the point I'm going to make. You're talking about a lot of office personnel who are on this site. And so that was my thought, not necessarily the refuse truck drivers, but people who are working daily in some kind of desk capacity at this site. And so that was just a thought that I'm throwing out there.
Understood. So the next little portion here, and again, I'm not going to ask for council to give us consensus today on this other than to continue to investigate it. But I do want to talk to you about a building we've got in the city. This was built in 1968. It's our existing fire resource center. It was built as a fire station. It sits on just over an acre of land, 1.1 acres. It's on Orangewood and 55th Avenue. It was the former Fire Station 151, but the new Fire Station 151 was built in 2009, and so it was repurposed in 2009 as the Fire Resource Center. So in 2009, the station equipment left, and the people moved right into it. There was no rehab that was done. There was no remodel. There was no consideration for what the rooms looked like. We just essentially pushed people into the space that was available. And there has been some minor work on this site since then. And again, I went back looking for the council meetings and that. But it was our understanding in field operations at the time that this building was going to go away. But again, I found nothing to verify that. There was a fire at a fire building. I thought it was rather ironic. In 2014, so there has been some minor building repairs associated with that. If you remember back in December 2019, we did a workshop on public safety buildings and just the condition of those buildings. This was the single worst building that we have in a public space safety perspective, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So if you look at just excluding the parking lots, it was the worst building we have. And fire has outgrown it already. If you see the storage here on this one side, these are metal storage bins. On this property today, they do two primary things. One is they store equipment. These are hoses, turnouts, chainsaws, hand tools, but also their reserve vehicles, generators, gators or small equipment, light towers, and trailers. And as they've grown through time and have different equipment and they're able to get new equipment for better firefighting purposes, they've just outgrown the space. And so not all equipment fits on this space today, and they do have it located at other fire stations across the city. The second thing they do, and that's a reason for those metal storage bins, is they have inadequate inside storage. The other thing they do at this site is they perform repairs and get equipment ready for the frontline service. So by this I mean any turnout gear that might be ripped or torn but is repairable. They have sewing machines, and I think that's a simplistic term for what they do, but they repair those. They repair the valves and the hoses and that on this property. But the other thing they do is they upfit these reserve vehicles. So to get a fire truck ready for service, they have to add all the hoses and the adapters and all the gear that the firefighters need. And Chief Garrison and Chief Gustafson can speak a lot more to this than I can. But they upfit these vehicles. And these vehicles are rather large, and they require rather frequent routine maintenance. These people with their vehicles are on the operations campus every day. And it may not be that same vehicle, but those couple people are on the campus every day swapping things out and upfitting vehicles. And in discussions we've had, if we were to site this building today and ask for its optimum location, it would probably be on that operations campus, not just on the operations campus, right next to fleet services. Just in the sense of these are the people they talk to, and this is where they are all the time. Some of the other deficiencies I just want to point out with the building, though, when they added air conditioning and HVAC equipment to it, it had to come below the ceiling. And so you can see in both of those pictures, we have it below the ceiling. You'll also see conduit run along the walls. That's how they added electric outlets and that sort of thing. So if you remember back when we talked about how we in facilities rate buildings, it's that facility condition index. It's the cost of your deficiencies divided by your replacement cost. This building, we anticipate now that we've done its condition assessment, will need about $2.8 million in capital costs, including a roof replacement, and that's what I'm showing here on this building, or this slide here is the roof, and just a close-up of the roof so you can see it. That puts its facility condition index just right around 45, which is the worst building that exists today in the city, outside probably of Spring City, which we haven't had the assessment done on. Just looking at what we could possibly do and the synergies we could make. we thought we could potentially put it right here, and this is shown in the light blue on the campus. This is where we've just gotten rid of the paint booth and the transfer station. And now we can talk about the synergies with fleet services. They're right next to the fleet building. I'm not going to commit to it, neither is a fire chief, but maybe the mechanics actually work out of the same building. And it's a discussion we've committed that we're going to have in the future. But maybe, you know, so that the fire resources personnel and the fleet personnel don't have to take a piece of equipment from building to building. Maybe it all happens in the same building. The other thing we've got on this campus for them now is that space right around this, because we've just created that for them, and we could then move their equipment. We could move their equipment from Fire Station 157, the equipment that's not used every day, that might be used once a month or so, put it at one location so that fire captain on the weekend would know where he has to go to pick up that piece of equipment, and just create that much more efficiencies for them. So with all those phases, this is what the potential proposed phase master plan would look like. And now I'm showing, you know, the buildings gone over here, being demolished, new fire resources in here, Spring City gone, police evidence storage here, and potential future crime lab added to it, a field staff building, and the field staff building can actually grow this way if needed. And then we're leaving these buildings alone. Building G, which is fleet, N, which is the warehouse, S, which is transit. These buildings are essentially reimagined, repurposed like we did with Fire Station 152. And then we've created this outside storage here to truly take a look at the future and break down those operational silos, get the people that work with one another, together with one another, and it doesn't matter what department they're in. Look at the efficiencies and adjacencies and make sure that we are incorporating some of those. And then we've got the potential to alleviate the pressure at City Hall. And in doing all this, really we haven't taken away from council priorities. We've looked at, you know, how do we do this more economically than we did in the past. So really what I want to talk to, and Councilmember Clark has already introduced this and walked us through the costs. So this is just the prior master plan. This isn't what we're proposing now. This is just the prior master plan, and it was $27 million plus the 10.3. So it was in two places in the capital improvement plan in the past. One project was for the campus, and there was a separate one for police evidence storage. This is already in there and programmed in the general obligation bonds under general government and under public safety, and it's programmed in the enterprise funds. So for a total of $37.3 million, this is what you've got programmed in the CIP at the end of last year and today. So we're not asking for any additional money. We're asking, let's probably reallocate it and spend it where we need to be. So by phase, this is now phase 1A, which is that field staff building. Again, as Councilmember Clark asked, it's about $220 a square foot. We have it divided up, the building by offices, workstations, and dispatching, but then also by parking and exterior amenities. The total for this is $11.8 million, and we've also included some estimates there on what it would be by fund. Again, understanding that we're going to get back to you with exactly how it is allocated and see if we can come back with a better one, also working in the land as well. That next phase, 1B, police evidence storage, $10.3 million. It is part of the public safety bond capacity. We do not have to go back to the voters to ask for this additional. This was part of the CIP last year, and we've just putting it on this campus. The next phase is that adaptive reuse. Now, this touches almost 40,000 square feet of buildings, so it's just under $100 per square foot. It does take into account some creation of outdoor storage as well. And then the third phase really is largely demolition, but the reason we've got more money here for water services, and again, we'll go through that allocation, is just the additional exterior storage they wanted, and as we get through and actually do the design on this, we'll have a much better allocation of cost. But as far as, you know, the majority of the costs here are our general fund. That's because it is demolition of the paint booth and the old transfer station. And now that I've said that, I want to relook at solid waste, and maybe they should be paying more for that demolition. So we'll look at these costs, but that's the estimated costs. So really what we're looking at is, on this, we're looking at not by phase, this is by fund. So our prior master plan, a total of $37 million. This is what we presented to you in 2018. And now we've got a proposed master plan for a total of $17.1 million, as we talked about with the operations complex, and 10.3 for police, so a total of $27 million. We're looking at a $9.9 million reduction. And we've done this largely because of the request of council that we looked at. Can we reuse some of the existing buildings, or do we have to build all new? And we opted to. We took a hard look at these buildings. We can repurpose them. And the other thing we've done is, by doing the phases the way we have, we don't have to go and build a large storage facility today to allow us to demolish Spring City, which was really driving a lot of the plans in the past. Now we're doing it very programmatically. We're going to reuse those buildings, buildings B, buildings P, which are set up to be storage-type buildings, and move the storage, the items that are needed in Spring City that departments need and touch every day, into some of those existing buildings on the campus. The good news is this is my last slide, but we are seeking consensus today, Vice Mayor, on phases 1 to 3 of the master plan. So we're not asking you to approve these. That would come via the way of the budget program, but we're asking for your consensus that phases 1 to 3 make sense, and staff should move forward, cost them, do the allocation plan like you asked us to, and bring them back to council. And then the second thing is to look at that phase 4, and phase 4 is Fire Resource Center.
Councilmember Aldama.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think it's my mask. I need to get a little closer. Two things, just a comment and then a question, kind of an ask. So, we oftentimes spend a lot of these meetings how we're going to rebuild offices for the white-collar worker in our organizations, not just this one. I'm really excited because today has blue-collar worker all over it. This is a project that serves our blue-collar workers, that serve our citizens, that make a difference. While all of our collared workers, regardless of what color, this is those service employees that truly, truly deserve a new facility for them to sit in, whether it's 5 minutes or if it's an hour in a meeting. So I'm really excited about this for our service workers in the city of Glendale. And then the ask, I shared a little bit earlier about some of the residents that live across the facility there. There's a retention area that's right next to next to the Lazy J. Could you bring back, and then the council could make the decision, in the retention area furthest to the south near Myrtle, what would it cost to put just a few amenities in there? For example, some benches, maybe a barbecue grill and a small ramada, something really inexpensive. And here's the reason why. Be a good neighbor, 1. 2, there's no neighborhood parks. If you have to leave, you have to cross Grand Avenue to the east, you have to cross 67th Avenue to the west, and you have to cross Glendale Avenue to the south. I'm not talking about a new park. It's already there. Just some amenities, if staff can bring that back to us. And it could be in any part of the phases 1 through 4. Just a thought for the council. Thank you.
Councilmember, any other comments or suggestions?
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, I've got a correct copy with the correct math on it on the PowerPoint, but I refreshed and it hasn't been corrected on what's posted. At least I've refreshed it twice and it still shows $10.1 million reduction rather than 9.1, just so that's what residents, if they want to go back and review this, I'd rather they have the correct information, and that hasn't been updated. So I want to make sure that happens. That's all I had. Thank you.
And Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Since you are seeking consensus, I want to thank you for responding to our council's request to revisit the master plan. I am very comfortable with what you're proposing. When you think back to 2002, and it's been 18 years, it's long overdue. But as we well know, things don't move swiftly when you're talking about city government. But the point is that, yeah, we need to do this. And the costs that you're bringing in are reasonable. And the fact that you have taken council direction into consideration is a big deal to me, and I appreciate it. So move forward by all means. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Melnar?
Thank you, Mayor, or Vice Mayor. I am fully in support of moving forward on this project. I know there's a little bit of tweaking that needs to be done with some of the cost allocation, but I think all of our questions that council's brought up today have been answered. So I'm in full support of moving forward on this project.
Yeah, I'm in support, so I think you have your direction. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Well, first, I'd like to just say thanks to the council. Great questions today. Want to acknowledge the work that Michelle and her team's been doing. It did start with the fact that you allowed, we brought the consultant in to kind of take a refresh look at that. And so it really started with the council investing in refreshing this. And so we want to thank you for doing that. Want to thank the work that Michelle has done. Councilmember Aldama brought something up just as a side note that I think is important. We've had a little bit of struggle with retention rates in certain areas of our employees. And one of them is in the area of solid waste and some of those who are kind of down in the heat really doing a lot of the work. And I think this is a great value statement that we do value them. I think they're going to, I think it'll help us with our retention and within those areas. Finally, if you map out all of the movement that we do as a city with all of our almost 1,900 employees, this one area probably has the opportunity for improving efficiency of how we move about and how we do our business more than any other area. While we've not done a comprehensive study on what the efficiency will be, I believe that with the council's direction and blessing as we go forward, that we're going to see for years to come a lot of efficiency gained, which will then show back up in terms of lower costs, lower rates, et cetera. So again, we thank you for the input today, but I do want to acknowledge, I know that our field ops team has put a tremendous amount of work along with water services, our public safety team, and transportation.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the city manager report. Mr. Phelps, is there anything you'd like to add today?
Vice Mayor, I have two quick items. One, we're really proud of a selection of one of our employees who's been named as one of America's top 50 economic developers in 2020, and that's Jesse Peterson. And this was actually selected by the private sector with consultants who work both with cities and jurisdictions and site selectors and other large users. And they have recognized Jessie for her work in 2020. I don't believe it'll be a surprise to any of you here in this room that she got the award, but she's certainly reflective of the great team that we have, not only in economic development, but within other departments here in the city. The second thing I want to talk briefly is about our cybersecurity training. As you know, we've been putting a lot of focus, especially with our new IT director. Farros is really working hard to make sure that we do everything we can as employees to minimize any kind of breaches of our security. And we've been putting together a whole series of very comprehensive classes that walk through almost every type of potential phishing and scam type of operations that we're seeing so often today. And so we're really happy that in the month of December, we had 3 trainings. We're currently at about 90% of our employees have now completed the trainings, and 60% have already completed their February training. So we are putting a lot of focus on that. Now, that being said, many of you probably caught last night the story out of Florida of where a local water department there was an attempt to modify some of the chemical that goes into the water to treat the water. And so want you to know that we have a very robust security plan with regards to how we protect all of our major infrastructure, as in the water, as in sewer. We don't talk publicly about our security plan, but our IT director has put together a very detailed presentation, and he will make it available to each or any one of the council members who would like to meet individually, and he'll be glad to go through and to go into detail how we are addressing security, especially in light of what we just learned about in Florida. But again, it's not something we'd want to talk in public, but we do take it very seriously. This council has been excellent since I've been here, of investing the necessary resources to make sure that we're staying on top of the security. But please feel free to reach out directly or work through Amy in my office, and we'll be glad to schedule a time for you to meet. And that does conclude my report.
Thank you. City Attorney's report, Mr. Bailey, do you have anything?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, briefly, some of you may be aware of the fact that the Arizona Supreme Court recently issued an opinion with regards to the Peoria gift clause matter. We're reviewing that, and we'll be giving you an update on that via memorandum. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is council items of special interest. Each council member will have the opportunity to indicate topics they would like to have discussed by council at future workshops. Councilmember Aldama.
None at this time, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Vice Mayor, not a council item of special interest, but two comments. One is regard to the liquor board bill from last year. It has made it through one house of the legislature, one portion of the legislature, state legislature, and is now marching through the second portion. I want to thank Ryan Lee for all the work that he has done on this particular item. It would have successfully made it last year, but they closed down the session without approving about 1,000 bills, and the liquor board bill was one of them. Secondly, I still get a lot of calls and complaints about fireworks. People are still shooting them off, even though this is not an approved season for fireworks. And I want to let the public know that Ryan Lee and I are reaching out to other city council members throughout the valley to see if there is support to put together some kind of package of amendments that will be presented to the state legislature at an appropriate time to see if we can create some fixes with regard to fireworks. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Malnar.
Nothing today, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomachoff.
Nothing today.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner.
Nothing today, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I have nothing. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
Second.
Got a motion by Councilmember Malnar, second by Councilmember Tomachoff. All in favor, vote aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.